President Trump spoke to the nation last night, and the reactions from the press are still pouring in. NBC's Chuck Todd, for instance, reacted by hurling himself to the floor in convulsions while frothing at the mouth and speaking in a deep, raspy voice what appeared to be nonsense until it was recorded and played backwards, whereupon it was recognized as a dialect of ancient Babylonian, which, when translated, meant Satan has unleashed his mighty power on the earth and I am his servant. Todd stopped reacting to the president's speech when a priest sprinkled holy water on him. Then he burst into flame, and the black shadow of his soul leapt from the ashes of his carnal form and plummeted downward through the floor, never to be seen again. CNN's Jim, look at me, I'm Jim Acosta, reacted to the speech by standing on the White House lawn and speaking directly to the CNN audience, a man named Joe Findersmith, who was waiting to board a plane to Seattle, which had been delayed. Acosta warned the audience about the president's remarks, saying, quote, "Pay no attention to that man in the Oval Office. Instead, just look at me, for I am Jim Acosta. Other men lie, but Jim Acosta does not lie, and therefore look at me, for I am he. Yes, I am Jim Acosta," unquote. Elsewhere on CNN, Don Lemon also gave his reaction to the speech, staring into the camera with a soulful look in his tearful eyes and saying, quote, "Oh, how well I remember the ever so beautiful speeches of Barack Obama, his mellow tones, his graceful rhetoric, how he would hold my head against his chest and comfort me, saying I should not worry about the troubles of the world, for he would handle them all with dignity and purity of spirit. And yes, these were just my fantasies, but how I miss them now that Trump is in office and everything is dreary," unquote. More anguished press reactions to the speech can be expected to come in throughout the rest of the year. Trigger warning, I'm Andrew Klavan, and this is The Andrew Klavan Show.
I feel hunky-dunky, life is tickety-boo. Birds are winging, also singing hunky-dunky-doo. Ship-shaped, ipsy-topsy, the world is zippity-zing. It's a wonderful day, hurrah, hooray! It makes me want to sing. Oh, hurrah, hooray! Oh, hooray, hurrah!
So last night, we got a close-up look at a genuine crisis in America. Donald Trump laid out his arguments for a barrier on the southern border. Democrats laid out their arguments for pretending to give a damn about border security while letting in people they hope will become future Democrat voters. Then the journalists took over, and they lied and distorted and spread confusion. They disgraced their potentially noble profession and widened the divide between Americans in an effort to support the causes of the left. That is a genuine crisis in this country. I have no problem with America having two parties, the Republicans speaking for the Americans they represent, and the Democrats speaking for communists, illegals, and clueless buffoons. But when a media ostensibly tasked with informing us becomes instead the corporate communication arm of a single party, it distorts the debate, it protects dishonesty and corruption on the left, and it spurs fury and overreaction from otherwise sensible and patriotic Americans on the right. That's a worse crisis than the one on the border, and I think we should begin to think about building a wall around Manhattan. We will begin thinking about that in just a moment, but first, let us talk about calming comfort blankets. This thing, I got to tell you, I put this on my bed. It's a weighted blanket. It's weighted perfectly, so it really feels like somebody is hugging you. It's just a very comfortable feeling, a very secure feeling. And when you put it on, you sleep better. And you know I don't sleep. When I use this calming comfort blanket, I fall asleep a lot faster. I do, and I sleep more soundly. I'm not kidding. It provides exactly the right amount of weight to help your body relax. It's designed to promote a sense of calmness and relaxation for a more restful sleep, and it helps the production of serotonin and melatonin, simulating deep touch pressure simulation. The calming comfort weighted blanket comes with a 90-day anxiety-free, stress-free, best night's sleep of your life guarantee from Sharper Image. Right now, just for our listeners, you can go to calmingcomfortblanket.com and use the promo code Andrew at checkout to receive 15% off the displayed price. Again, that's calmingcomfortblanket.com, promo code Andrew. And because you can't put a price on a great night's sleep, go online now at calmingcomfortblanket.com and use promo code Andrew for your special discount today. It really it must work because I never sleep, but I've slept much better since using it. So before the speech last night, the media was in a panic. They were talking about they weren't going to put it out there. It was no fair that the president of the United States should be allowed to speak to the nation without being filtered through their brilliant minds and the opinions. They were just spreading panic. They were spreading panic by saying Trump was going to spread panic. My favorite interchange, I mean, just unbelievable, was Jim, look at me, I'm Jim Acosta, saying this to Kellyanne Conway. I meant after that, the one after that.
Can you promise that the president will tell the truth tonight? Will he tell the truth?
Yes, Jim, and can you promise that you will?
I will.
The whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I'm not the
Am
one
I allowed
who
to
has
mention
the
God to
alternative facts
you?
problem like you do.
No, well, that, Jim, I know that's a cheat. Make sure that goes viral.
Okay.
This is why, by the way, this is why I'm one of the only people around here who even gives you the time of day.
Can you guarantee
And
that the
let
president's
me get back in your
fact check?
face, because you're such a smart ass most of the time, and I know you want this to go viral. A lot of these people don't like you.
I was reminded of an old Marlon Brando picture where Marlon Brando played a secretly homosexual husband to Liz Taylor. And Liz Taylor said, how would you like it if a naked woman dragged you out into the street and beat you in public? That's what I was watching Kellyanne Conway slap around Jim Acosta. But after all the panic and all this, the press finally caved in, and out of the mercy and goodness and generosity of their hearts, allowed us to hear the words of the president of the United States, whom we had elected to lead the country. They thought we had elected them, but in fact we had elected the president. And Trump was basically very calm, very direct, and really fair. Let's just look at a little bit of the Trump speech, because it was like 9 minutes long, and he came out. First of all, he said there is a crisis at the border. This is cut 3.
This is a humanitarian crisis, a crisis of the heart, and a crisis of the soul. Last month, 20,000 migrant children were illegally brought into the United States. A dramatic increase. These children are used as human pawns by vicious coyotes and ruthless gangs. 1 in 3 women are sexually assaulted on the dangerous trek up through Mexico. Women or children are the biggest victims, by far, of our broken system. This is the tragic reality of illegal immigration on our southern border. This is the cycle of human suffering that I am determined to end.
So just remember that, because I'm going to come back to it, that Trump said the crisis is, and this is what's happening, that now these families are coming over from Honduras, from Central America, these broken countries, and these families are coming over, and the children are coming over, and they're being abused, and they're being harmed, and we don't have any place to put them, and the children are being separated from the parents. That's the crisis that he's talking about. That's why he says it's a crisis. He went on to talk about the idea. See, this is the other thing, because the Democrats will not distinguish between legal immigrants, who America has historically and continually welcomed, and illegal immigrants, who are, by definition, criminals. And he made this distinction. This is cut number 1.
America proudly welcomes millions of lawful immigrants who enrich our society and contribute to our nation. But all Americans are hurt by uncontrolled illegal migration. It strains public resources and drives down jobs and wages. Among those hardest hit are African Americans and Hispanic Americans. Our southern border is a pipeline for vast quantities of illegal drugs, including meth, heroin, cocaine, and fentanyl. Every week, 300 of our citizens are killed by heroin alone, 90% of which floods across from our southern border. More Americans will die from drugs this year than were killed in the entire Vietnam War.
It's a problem. I mean, he's being absolutely direct. He's being absolutely factual. There's no panic here. He's just telling you what is going on. We all know this has been a problem, and it was a problem way before Donald Trump became president of the United States. This is a problem that goes back to Teddy Kennedy, basically, opening the borders, telling us everything, and the Democrats constantly saying, yeah, just give us amnesty now and we'll deal with security later. And they never did. I mean, it really goes way back, even to Ronald Reagan, who fell for this. And finally, he talked about the idea of a wall. Now, the thing that he's asking for is asking for a lot of humanitarian aid. He's asking for more money, which is definitely needed for the people who process all these guys coming in. But he talked about the wall. And this, to me, is one of the stupidest Democrat arguments, that a wall doesn't work. There are walls around prisons to keep people out. There are walls around your house to keep people out. And here's what Trump had to say about it.
Some have suggested a barrier is immoral. Then why do wealthy politicians build walls, fences, and gates around their homes? They don't build walls because they hate the people on the outside, but because they love the people on the inside. The only thing that is immoral is the politicians to do nothing and continue to allow more innocent people to be so horribly victimized. America's heart broke the day after Christmas when a young police officer in California was savagely murdered in cold blood by an illegal alien who just came across the border. The life of an American hero was stolen by someone who had no right to be in our country.
Now, again, factual, calm, telling you the truth. People are being killed by illegal aliens. And it is, how can I put this? Obviously, any murder is a tragedy. Anytime someone is taken away, life is ended by violence, it's an awful, awful thing. But it does add a certain kind of sharp shock to it when you realize that just by enforcing the laws, you might not have lost a loved one. If they had just enforced the laws, that's, really, I think deep down, that's all Americans want. They want to know what the law is and will we enforce it? And that's the problem. And it's all Trump is talking about. Now, some conservatives are saying, well, why didn't he do this before? I think that's a perfectly good question. But when he performs like this is the time for, I think, conservatives to support this guy. He is making a rational argument. He is saying something completely logical, completely necessary. And I think this is the time to just say, yeah, he should have done it before. He should have done it when he had both houses. He didn't. A lot of that has to do with what was going on in the House. Never mind. Here we are in this fight now. Politics, smart politics, means supporting a president who has been supportive of our agenda, the conservative agenda. That just seems to me simple, basic, intelligent politics. So now let's look at the reaction from the Democrats.
I'm hysterical. I'm having hysterics. I'm hysterical. I can't stop when I get like this. I can't stop. I'm hysterical.
All right, so that's the usual reaction from the Democrats. Actually, it was hilarious. Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer stood next to each other with these long, grim faces. They look like that famous painting, Grant Wood, American Gothic, with the guy holding the pitchfork. This thing went nuts on Twitter. They were trying, the Huffington Post, I think it was trying to say, like, oh, the people loved them. The people loved them. They looked like, it's very hard. It's very hard to respond to the president. It is very hard to respond to the president. You remember when they took Marco Rubio apart for drinking water during his speech, but they're never going to touch these guys. But let's just look for a minute. Let's take a look at what Pelosi had to say for a sec.
We all agree we need to secure our borders while honoring our values. We can build the infrastructure and roads at our ports of entry. We can install new technology to scan cars and trucks for drugs coming into our nation. We can hire the personnel we need to facilitate trade and immigration at the border. We can fund more innovation to detect unauthorized crossings. The fact is, the women and children at the border are not a security threat. They are a humanitarian challenge, a challenge that President Trump's own cruel and counterproductive policies have only deepened.
So, give us our voters. We want our voters, and we want to play up to the Hispanic community, But listen, this is not my problem. It is not my problem that Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi are out there selling their side of the story. There's a left and a right in this country. They have a right to play to their voters. If that was all it was, if all we saw on television was Donald Trump making his case and Chuck and Nancy making their case, I would say, all right, well, I disagree with Chuck and Nancy, but fair enough. They have their voters. Let them speak to their voters. Let them argue over the middle and see who convinces whom. I think Trump would have been the winner in that debate, but that is not what bothers me. It is not a problem that there are two parties. It is not a problem even that the Democrat Party is being radicalized. Let them be radicalized. I think they'll make themselves marginal, but that's just part of the political process. What is a problem are these massive corporations, ABC, CBS, NBC, the CNNs of the world, the New York Times of the world, their fact-checking was disgraceful. I mean, look, here's CNN fact-checking the Democrats.
Hold on one second, because we fact-checked the president. Let's be fair on both sides. Did anything stand out to you, what we heard from Speaker Pelosi and Senator Schumer?
I didn't hear any factual errors. I missed about the first 30 seconds, but the rest of it, it was standard political rhetoric. And I think the thing about the president that's so different is that in these kinds of addresses that are thoroughly vetted, written by teams as speechwriters, he still will include, 5, 6, 7 misleading, dishonest claims.
Really, this is the kind of thing they were saying. For instance, Trump would say, well, heroin, 90% of heroin comes in through the southern border. And the New York Times would say, yes, but fentanyl comes in from China. He didn't say fentanyl came in through the southern border. They're just making stuff up. I mean, the Times was embarrassing. Anything they could ding him on. The one thing you could ding him on was that he said Mexico was going to pay for the wall, and now it's kind of got, it's got a little bit fuzzy how that's going to work. He said we'll make the money back in the new NAFTA deal. Okay. Fair enough, a little bit of political verbiage there, but really everything he's saying. What else did the Washington Post said that Trump said 266,000 aliens were arrested in the past 2 years, but that number is misleading. Why? Because this figure includes all types of crime. That's why it's misleading. I mean, this is what they were saying. Politico, their fact check was, it's not a crisis because the flow of people are down. But remember what he said. He said that it's the flow of families that's up, and that's what constitutes the crisis. Also, the fact that the flow is down after this has been going on for 10 years, after, millions of people have come in and that now 400,000 more are coming in, that's still a problem. And finally, the New York Times said when Trump said that Chuck Schumer had supported a wall many times. The New York Times says, well, that needs context. Let's give that some context. Let's look at what Democrats have been saying about the wall from Cut 10.
Mexico does nothing to enforce its border.
The bill before us will authorize some badly needed funding for better fences.
I voted numerous times when I was a senator to spend money to build a barrier.
I don't oppose building a fence where you need to do it, where the border is porous. I just don't have a problem with that.
Until the American people are convinced that we will stop future flows of illegal immigration, we will make no progress.
So I mean, look, if they reported this factually and the argument took place, we would just be having the argument. But instead, you have conservatives are furious because you have this constant barrage of blanket of corporate misinformation. It drives them crazy. It also is conducive to corruption on the left because they know nobody's going to call them out. They know that they're protected by the press. It is damaging to the country. I'm a First Amendment absolutist. I don't think the government should do anything to fix this. But again and again, I have to keep saying this, the press, out of pure integrity, should just reform themselves. I want to end, before we're going to get to Jenna Ellis and talk to her about some of the legal aspects of this. But before I do that, I want to just take a look at this thing that our friends at Campus Reform, I love these people, they put out a video where they went out and read to college students things that Democrats had said about immigration, but told them it was Trump saying them. Then they got the reactions as if they had heard from Trump, and then they told them that it was really Democrats saying it. Here's just a clip.
It's divisive. I think America is a land of opportunity, place for inclusion.
I just really think it's a kind of hateful speech in general.
It's just a negative message. Like when he talks about like illegal immigrants, it's just one rude, like to talk about people like that.
It kind of underlies a lot of things about like discrimination and people and their prejudices and things like that. So I feel like that stuff is touchy to talk about.
There are racial biases kind of sort of deep embedded in there.
In a word, I'd say it's more jingoist.
Well, I think his demeanor overall is just unacceptable.
I think just the way that he's referring to people across the wall is very dehumanizing.
So rhetoric like that is not helpful?
No, not at all.
What if I told you these were from Chuck Schumer, Barack Obama, and Hillary Clinton?
How about that?
Really?
Really?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Democrats and Republicans have said things about border control.
That's interesting. I didn't think that. That's interesting.
That's the future journalists of America. If Trump said it, it's mean. If somebody else said it, it's just interesting. Trump did a good job last night. He laid out his proposals. He explained them. He did an excellent job of communicating. The Democrats did what they do. I thought they whiffed, but like, you make up your own mind. But it's the press. The press covered itself in shame. It has been doing this not just since Trump was elected. It was doing it when George W. Bush was elected. It did it when Mitt Romney and John McCain were running for president. It is just an embarrassment. It is an embarrassment that these powerful corporations are distorting the news and keeping Americans at daggers drawn, which they would not be if they could simply discuss the issues among themselves. Jenna Ellis, I don't have to introduce Jenna Ellis. At this point, she's part of the family, but I will anyway. She's a director of the Dobson Policy Center and a contributor to the Daily Wire and the Washington Examiner and the excellent Federalist. Her book is The Legal Basis for a Moral Constitution, a guide for Christians to understand America's current constitutional crisis. How you doing, Jenna?
I'm great, Drew. Glad to see that you still have the Ted Cruz beard. I'm a fan.
Ted Cruz has the Andrew Klavan beard. I'm sorry.
That's true. Yes, and in the Twitter poll, I think it got a 79% approval rating. So that was a really great thing.
That's why I'm just governed by popular opinion.
Absolutely.
So one thing that Trump didn't do last night is he didn't declare an emergency. Sources say he's still out about that. I was kind of glad he didn't. What's your take? I've heard legal scholars say that he won't get away with it, declaring an emergency and just spending the money. What's your take about it?
Well, I agree with you that I think it's a good call right now that he hasn't declared a national emergency, but he absolutely could. And the difference right now in our court system between whether or not someone in Congress or the executive branch is actually able to use their constitutionally vested powers depends on an activist court. And we've seen that over and over and over again. And so this really, the bottom line to this is not whether or not President Trump actually has that power, but whether or not an activist court, especially in the Ninth Circuit, is going to try to stop it.
But eventually that would get to the Supreme Court, would it not? I mean, and John Roberts has always been kind of pro-executive power, although he did slap at Trump when Trump talked about an Obama judge.
Yeah, and I think it will go to the Supreme Court. And what will be interesting is to see if the kind of vitriolic messaging between Justice Roberts and Trump and that relationship will kind of override Justice Roberts' just opinion and his faithfulness to originalism. I think that we saw that with the Obamacare decision in terms of siding more with liberals on that. And so it'll be interesting to see what Justice Roberts does. But if we're looking at just a faithful application of the Constitution, the rule of law, and all of the delegation that Congress has provided to the president, and that's the president, regardless of whether that's Obama or Trump. In 1983, the Supreme Court in a 7-2 decision actually held that where Congress delegates authority to the executive, they can't try to then block the policy that is enacted and the actions undertaken just because they don't like how a president acts in furtherance to that delegation of authority. And so what we're seeing is that the Democrats really, and their messaging last night was so evidential of this, that they just don't like Trump. But the policy and how he decides to use his powers is why we have elections. And he is the president, regardless of whether people, hashtag not my president.
So answer me this, too, because this is something I'm really confused about. Yesterday, I think it was, the new governor of California, Gavin Newsom, said, we are now going to be a sanctuary state. All are welcome. In New York, the mayor of New York City says they're going to give free health care to everybody, regardless of their status. If the federal law is that people who come in here illegally can be deported, why can a state say that this is a sanctuary? Why are they? I mean, if for instance, a state said, well, we're not going to have gay marriage in our state. We're not going to recognize it. We're not going to permit it. The law would come in and say, no, you have to. It is now federal law because of the Supreme Court decision that this is a right that gay people have. They couldn't disobey that. Why should California be allowed to disobey federal law?
Well, so this goes into a separation of powers question that isn't just a separation on the federal level between the three branches of government, but a separation horizontally as well between the federal, the state government, and, by the way, the individuals. We always forget that part, that there's also powers not given to the state or the federal government that are reserved to the individual.
Okay.
But the Obergefell decision actually was completely unconstitutional because defining marriage is actually given to the states, where sanctuary city policy goes directly against the Constitutional's vestment in Article 1, Section 8 of immigration rules and legislation to the federal government. So it becomes a difference of whether or not this is a state versus a federal question. And marriage issues, healthcare issues, education issues, so many things that the federal government has stepped into actually do belong to the states. So on the state funding of healthcare, states can choose to spend money, their own money, however they choose, unless there is a competent constitutional law to the contrary. If they start spending federal money, they would probably risk losing it. But sanctuary city policy goes directly against the federal government's vested power to determine immigration policy. So that's why that is unconstitutional, but probably spending state money on healthcare would not run afoul of the Constitution.
Is there any remedy that the federal government has when California says we're now a sanctuary state or a city says we're now a sanctuary city? Is there anything the federal government, I mean, they're not going to come in, I assume, and arrest the governor. What, are they helpless?
Well, no, I mean, and this is why the sanctuary cities and that whole issue needs to go before the Supreme Court, and we need to argue the separation of powers and say this is a federal government question. And also Congress needs to legislate. I mean, here we have President Trump, who is really the only one that is caring about comprehensive immigration reform, not just on a national emergency imminency question, but providing for the rule of law comprehensively to address these questions that we've all been talking about for over a decade. And so Congress is really the one that needs to act. They need to have a clear federal law that is against sanctuary city policy. And even if that's challenged in court, we do have a conservative majority that hopefully will faithfully apply the Constitution and say states, no, you can't. And then that way hold them in some kind of contempt, foreclose federal dollars for sanctuary cities. I mean, there are other remedies that are punitive and that can force the states to comply with federal law. That's the design of separation of powers. And that's why the Constitution provides certain powers to the federal government that are good for the general welfare, meaning the entire nation. Because if California allows a sanctuary city, that's going to affect me in Colorado. That's going to affect people in any other state.
Yeah. All right, Jenna, it's always great to see you. Thank you very much. That was really clarifying. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
I'll see you soon. All right.
Sounds good.
We have got the mailbag coming up. I don't know if I mentioned that, but you're there it is. We are moments away from solving all your problems. Our answers to your questions are guaranteed 100% correct. They will change your life on occasion for the better. Ben Shapiro, his new book, The Right Side of History, will be out soon. I don't know how soon because they're not moving the teleprompter, so I can't tell. It's March 19th. But if you head over to therightside-of-history-book.com, you can secure your own copy this very moment. It's a great read. You'll be glad you did it. All right, we got the mailbag coming up, but I got to say goodbye to Facebook and YouTube. Come to dailywire.com and subscribe. It is a lousy $10 a month. For a lousy $100, you get the whole year, you get the Leftist Tears tumbler, and you get to be in the mailbag, which is a little uncomfortable, but when we let you out, you can ask your questions and we will solve all your problems. That's coming right up.